So thanks so much for joining this webinar on the Building Rural Futures Scenario. I mean, it has lots of titles. So the Scenario Building Futures Project. I'm so glad you can join. My name's Heather. If we haven't met, I think lots of you have, but I work with Cooperatives First. I'm just going to take a second here to do the clicky thing that helps me to share my slides. And okay. Gonna bring that back. Okay, so this Rural Future Scenario Building Project, this is the first opportunity that we have to share sort of more publicly about the project that we've been working on as a group. A lot of people from the group are here today on scenario building of future scenario projects that Mary and I sort of envisioned, I guess it was the fall of last year. And we ran a focus group through January to March, and now there's a bit more to come. So I wanted to talk about what this is, what we found, what we saw, what futures thinking is. There's a lot of different threads here. So I wanted to host this webinar for us to share about the project and about what's going to come out of it, I guess, and the rationale behind it. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm talking for a little bit, and then Mary's going to share with the group what futures thinking is and why we chose it for rural and that kind of thing. So the webinar is hosted on Zoom. You can find the chat function and just make sure you're messaging to everyone when you select, so you're not, direct messaging me or when you don't mean to, or to somebody else in the group. The other thing I want to do before we officially get rolling is, of course, we're in virtual space, but I'd like to acknowledge the land that I am on today here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan is Treaty 6 territory, which is the homeland of the Métis. And if you want to join, put out the chat up and tell us where you're joining from today, that'd be really nice. And your name. Thanks so much. I see chat things happening, so I'm not going to open it because I feel like I have too many windows going on right now. But thanks for doing those introductions and saying where you're joining from today. So if you haven't heard of Cooperatives First before, if you have and you don't know what we are a business development organization that supports people starting cooperative businesses. And we're funded by Federated Cooperatives Limited and the cooperative retailing system. And so we support people starting cooperatives primarily in rural communities and Indigenous cooperatives. And so we have a number of different things that we do, but we have different services to support people starting cooperatives. But this project was a little bit of an opportunity for us to do something a little bit different and gain some insights into rural futures, I guess. And there's still a bit of a question mark in case you're wondering what exactly that means. We will answer that question before the end of this webinar. So our high-level goal for this project was to dial deeper into an understanding of rural communities in Western Canada, which is a big part of where we work, and to understand what some of the issues were, where some of the opportunities were. And so that's kind of where we started. Like, we want to have an opportunity to speak directly to people who are living in rural communities, sort of in a deep way over a period of time, to kind of get deeper understanding. Because I think if we are proposing solutions to something, we have to understand what we're even talking about and what people are thinking about. So that's where, we started with that. We wanted to have an opportunity to host a very listening conversation. And so from that, I met with Mary Doyle through an event that she was hosting. I'll introduce her later. And we started talking about, well, what if we could actually do something a little bit different and dial into potentially what possible futures are for rural communities. What if we could gather a group together and talk about, both things that they saw today, things that might affect future, and to start to look at things that might affect us 10 years from now, instead of just the things that are coming up in the next 2 weeks. Because I know my to-do list is usually just the things that I have to do like 2 days from today. That's all I get to. I wake up in the morning, check my calendar, and I'm like, yep, that's what I have to do. But this is an opportunity to step back and say, like, can we draw this out and kind of shake off the sort of today and imagine bigger and more possibility. So that's the Futures project. So Cooperatives First, they sponsored this initiative. That's me, and we selected a wonderful group of participants who I'll just going to shout out to in a second here across Western Canada. And we hired Mary to do the founder of Mural on Purpose and certified Foresight professional to do the project design facilitation and to create some, really cool documents afterwards as well. So the project scope, so the facilitation part was just an 8-week session, an hour and a half for 8 weeks. It's a big commitment. That's what everybody signed up for. And it was pretty amazing how committed people were to this project. Mary might mention this later, but people were joining from the airport, waiting to get on a plane. People were joining from the coat room of other conferences. I mean, people did not want to miss a session. And it was people who are living in rural communities, community leaders, economic development officers, elected officials, and there's 21 people in total. So we use the Institute for the Futures Thinking Alternative Future Scenario methodology that Mary led us through, and she's going to explain a little bit more about what that is. And then the outcomes of this were, like I said, to get that deep insight into what is shaping and driving the future of rural Western Canada, as well as just the opportunity for this cohort to sort of bring together a group of similar like-minded thinkers and energize this group of people, and as well to gather insights from their weekly discussions. So this is, sorry, I took all your pictures. You're all here. This is such a great group. I see Robin's laughing. Like, yes, I've just like screen capped all of the pictures that you put in the group, in the Mural board. But yeah, it was such a great group. As people from different professions, people from different perspectives. But I think that all brought kind of a different flavor. I mean, the common thread though is Western Canada. So it's people from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, and Alberta. People working in economic development officers, people representing or part of community organizations, people who are small business owners, like just a number of different things. But yeah, I think there was definitely some magic in bringing this group together. So you might be thinking at this point that I haven't really explained what futures thinking is, and you're right, and I'm going to let Mary do that. I wanted to just sort of position the project and the why Cooperatives First decided to go down this road of doing this project. But Mary's going to introduce a little bit more about futures thinking and why it's important for rural, and then just give us a peek kind of behind the activities that we did and what some of the outcomes or the things that we found, the interesting bits that we found out of this. So Mary is a rural advocate and a Canadian entrepreneur, and she is founded an organization called Mural on Purpose, as well as being a certified Foresight professional. And I recently just learned has done all of the trainings available from Institute for the Future, so they need to make more courses so she can continue to take them. And I'd just like to welcome her to share with us a little bit more about futures thinking and this project. So it's all yours. I'm going to make you the host. Okay, I'm going to pin your video now. Hang on. Okay, you're up.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. And thank you to everybody who is here, and especially the people who have been with us for months going through this whole process. It was so much fun, and I learned so much information about every different rural community that you represent, and they're all different. And that, I don't know why that surprises me every single time. It shouldn't. We know every rural community is different, and has its own unique kind of way of living and developing and building and people and it's just, I guess it's constantly a refreshing reminder of all of that. So thank you for representing your community so well. I would like to start by acknowledging the place that I call home is on the ancestral land of the Huron, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississauga Anishinaabe people. I'm in Ontario, and I've been all across Canada and spent a lot of time working with Western communities, and I really, really admire the spirit that you have, and the drive and the determination and the kind of the agency that you take when you're building your communities, because it's so important. And it's one of the things I talk about with Rural on Purpose a lot. So my role today is to talk a little bit about futures thinking, and why I think it's so important for rural communities, and give you a little bit of an idea of what we did during some of our sessions. I did spend the last couple of years studying with Institute for the Future, and they are the oldest Foresight organization in the world, founded in 1968 in California. And they're amazing, an amazing group of people. I would encourage everyone here to become a futurist in their part-time job, or, in their spare time, and their, just for fun. That's what I did, just for fun. And it turned into something that I built into everything that I'm doing, because it fits so well with Rural on Purpose and economic development and education and community building and all of that. So I'm hoping that some of you have the bug, and you're going to continue down that path as well. Institute for the Future pioneered most of the methods that are standard practice for professional futurists today. So they're a really great organization. And yeah, I think I'm the only person that's done every single piece of training they've ever offered. And now I'm going to be working with them to build a Rural Futures Foresight program. So yay, we're going to take some of this work and some of the expertise that we have, and we're going to build out something that hopefully people around the world are going to be able to experience and get some value out of. So that's pretty exciting. Best way to start with any kind of futures discussion is to start with a quick experience of it, to talk about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you all see this screen? Thumbs up. Good. Okay. This is just a quick, it's just a little orientation activity that we do, but it can be so powerful. It's called Foursquare, through the Institute for the Future. And what I'm going to ask you to do on your screen, just use your screen. If you have a little phone, it's going to be a little bit tougher, but you'll get the idea. When you think about rural communities on a scale of 1 to 10, take a look at the horizontal line first on the grid. And what I want you to do is think about whether you think it's getting worse or it's getting better. The future of rural communities. Do you believe that we're headed in a better direction or in a worse one? And there's no right or wrong answer. And this is just a really great discussion starter. Put your finger on that line, exactly where you think that is. Okay, now keep your finger on that spot. And when you think about the future of rural communities, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much power do you personally have to shape or influence that future that you're building? And how do you have the influence to help decide whether it's going to get better or worse? And I want you to move your finger up or down, 10 being most powerful, 1 feeling you have no power, and put your finger somewhere in those 4 grids. Okay, now make a note of where you are. If you are in that top left-hand corner, you feel like the future is getting better. No, you feel like the future is getting worse, but you feel capable of helping to change and reshape it. Think about whether or not that describes you. Moving to the right of that, you feel that the future is getting better and you have the power to influence it. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, you feel that the future is getting better, but you don't feel like you have a lot of personal power to shape it and influence it. And then the very bottom left-hand side, you think that it's getting worse, and you do not feel empowered. You don't feel that you have the ability to help shape that in that direction. And let's say I just should have put this on there. We'll say the top left is 1, the top right is 2, bottom right is 3, and bottom left is 4. If you feel comfortable putting that in the chat, what number, what quadrant you think you fell in, that would be fantastic. There is no right or wrong answer, and a lot of these things are perfect jumping off points where you can have these really great discussions. It can be used as an activity to start a conversation about the future, the one that you're exploring, the future of your community. If you're looking at the future of libraries, you could use this activity in a meeting about libraries in your community and just get a sense in the room of where people are starting. Do they feel empowered, or do they feel hopeful, or do they really not feel hopeful because of something that's happened that they don't feel they have any ability to change? You could look at the future of municipal leadership. You could start any kind of a meeting with this activity, and you can gauge how positive people are feeling, how much agency they believe they have. And it can lead to really deep discussions that generate important insights that really surprise you when you do this with a group of people. Now, I don't see the chat right now because I'm sharing my screen, so I can't look at the numbers, but and I know we don't have a lot of time today to go through this, but I want to just give you right off the bat, here's a little tool. Use this in any meeting that you have, any time that you are about to embark on an important conversation. Do this and start having some conversation about it first, and it will set the stage really nicely for any kind of a meaningful discussion. And it really works. We could do that. We could spend the whole time today doing that, but we don't have the whole time today to do that. But that's just one thing. So one of the things futures thinking can help us with is what we call our official futures. We all have an official future, and it can be a trap because it prevents us from seeing beyond the present, and it blinds us to all other possibilities. So what's an official future? It's the belief that the future is whatever is happening now. Oh, you have a poll. Awesome. Oh, sorry, Heather, I didn't mean to do that. I was trying to move it off of my screen there. Can you start it again?
It should be still up.
Is it? Okay. I don't know.
It's still there.
Thank you.
Well,
okay, good. Perfect.
I think this is anonymous too. So you can just throw it in and just say % if people want to share on there.
Okay, perfect. I like the poll idea. I didn't think about doing that. So the official future is something that the belief that the future is whatever is happening now, but it's extended and possibly amplified, and it tends to become that future that we imagine is the only one that exists. So if things are going really well today, then we tend to believe that they're going to continue to go well. And if things are falling apart, we also tend to believe that there is no way that we're going to be able to put them back together. And so those are official futures, and they really get us stuck. And futures thinking can help unstick us from those official futures. And when we plan with our official future in mind, we tend to base that planning on uncomplicated growth. But what we believe, so we believe that the future is going to look very much like today, but that's rarely the case. That's very rarely the case. And I think pandemic is a perfect example of that. Futures thinking can help us question our own default assumptions about what is to come. And the future is, we can question our belief that the future is simply the present but extended. So we can train our brains to get comfortable and with uncomfortable possibilities, because the things that we accept today as given, as unchangeable, can rapidly become different. And practicing foresight can help us with that. So that's one of the benefits of foresight. It's not meant to replace strategic planning. And that's one of the things I want to say. I know we have economic developers in the room. Foresight and futures thinking is not meant to replace strategic planning at all, but it can be a really useful piece that you add in before a planning cycle, because it will refocus people on possibilities rather than constraints. And it just opens up your thinking and your dialogue and allows you to explore things in a much more open possibility thinking way. And you'll be surprised at how much of a difference it can make to your actual strategic planning that is really, really important and something that we don't want to throw away in our communities at all. So, and if it's a challenge to find a strategic direction, mapping out the future can help you map your options. So even if you don't go into your strategic planning with a plan, with an idea, you can use futures thinking before that to help map out options. So that's another really, really good way to use it with this group of people. So foresight's not about predicting the future. There are far too many variables to accurately predict exactly what the world's going to be like in 5 years or in 10 years or in 20 years. Instead, foresight is about imagining different futures, some of them positive, some of them negative, some of them strange, weird futures. So we can imagine almost anything, but by imagining all of these possible futures, we can begin talking about which futures we want to live and work in, and then take the practical steps today to make the futures more likely to happen. So thinking effectively about the future requires, first and foremost, the ability to acknowledge that anything can be different in the future. And it's almost a mantra for us. We have to keep telling ourselves that. In fact, the only thing that is certain about the future is that it will be different. And what we do is try to investigate how that's going to be different. So we talked about scenarios, and Heather said we had lots of different names and titles for the project. It evolved with us as we were going through the whole project, and as we started, this is the first full group projects that I've done. And I did it differently from the order that it's done in, that is dealt with normally. And I'll explain that in a minute. So why futures as scenarios? When change is deep and hard to see, we need to take many alternate possibilities into account so that we can compare them and contrast them and then choose the future that we want. And there are lots of planning methods that you can use, futurist planning methods that you can use. But what we chose was the alternative futures framework. And that examines the futures in 4 distinct archetypes or generic shapes of change. So it gives us the ability to kind of create 4 boxes that are very different from one another and explore the communities that we live in and the region that you live in terms of 4 very distinct futures. The first one is growth. The growth scenario is very much like your official future. It's a story of more. So in the growth archetype,
10 minutes you can eat lunch. 10 minutes.
In the growth archetype, trends continue into the future with minimal disruption, and we get more of what we already have. So it's like our official future. So we have a place for that one. We talk about that one. Constraint is a story of struggle against a common threat. So it's about it's a story about a core guiding value or principle that organizes a society and governs our behavior and helps us deal with some kind of a common threat together. We all come together, we agree on how to deal with something, even if we don't like it, and even if we don't completely agree, but we come together around our core values in order to deal with a constraint. So it's not ideal, but it's a way of functioning and getting through something. Then we have a story of collapse. The story of collapse, that archetypal story, is a story of tragic failure. It is a rapid, catastrophic systems and infrastructure breakdown that happens in a community, and they can happen as well. So we explore where that possibilities for a collapse might exist and what might happen and how might we deal with it, and we look at that archetype. And the last one is powerful and getting better. I'm going to come back to this in a second.
I just closed the poll and I
It's
shared the
okay, it just
results in
popped
case
up and
anyone
I
wanted
was
to.
excited
I'm
to
sorry.
see it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I just thought I'd cut it off. Okay.
I'm going
Sorry.
to get to that, back to it in one sec. The other one is the transformation story, and this is a breakthrough insight that challenges our assumptions about things. Society or systems fundamentally change or reorganize around some kind of a new paradigm, and our community transforms. Something in our community transforms into something brand new, something that we hadn't considered before, and that's the other archetype. So we look at those four, and we examined throughout that 2 months, we examined our communities in each of those potential story arcs. And we looked at what could potentially cause each one of them and what we might do during that time. So that's a really useful tool for exploring your community and trying to figure out some of the things that might surprise you if they happened. And it's surprising how you can actually see when you start going through this process and start looking at signals and drivers of change in your own community, you can see possible pathways. And all of a sudden you start going, maybe it's not that far-fetched that something like this could happen. Maybe we could end up over in this direction because I see it actually moving there. So a future scenario itself is all it is a short story. It's a detailed description of a particular future that you might wake up in, a future in which something is dramatically different from today. That's all a scenario is. What we did was we flipped it with our program, and we didn't start with a scenario and generate insights about our communities. We used the scenario archetypes and the frameworks to explore rural communities. So we were filling those boxes with all of the potential ideas and things that might contribute to that particular archetype. So we use the frameworks to expand our thinking about the future and the challenges to make better decisions by considering a broad range of possibilities. So as we tackle the challenges of the next decade, we should not be limited to what seems reasonable today. You can't change or invent something new unless you can imagine how things can be different. And the future is a place where anything can be different. And that's essentially what futures thinking is. And that I'm just giving you just some broad strokes so that we can take a look at the work that we did and what came of it. So Heather, I am going to jump over into if I can find my if you want to share the poll while I'm getting my screen sorted out. For some reason I have to stop sharing and share again.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'll just read it out here. I think it's shared, but it's hard for me to know what the other side looks like on this. So the future Foursquare, I hope I got the categories right, but quadrant 1 was that I am powerful, however things are getting worse, is 21% of the answers. Quadrant 2 is I am powerful, but, and this is not any grade, like you could have answered 1, I am powerful, or a 10, I am powerful. So there's no variation in here. Quadrant 2 is I'm powerful and things are getting better with 63%. That's the top. Quadrant number 3 is I'm not powerful, but things are getting better. It's 5%, the lowest response. And quadrant number 4 is I am not powerful and things are getting worse, is 11%. So the first one is quadrant 2, I'm powerful and things are getting better. And then the number 2 would have been quadrant 1, which is I am powerful, however things are getting worse.
I love that. I almost wish that we had done that at the very beginning of our 8-week session, and then explored it at the end again, because I think although I could be wrong. I mean, you never cease to surprise me that you're so positive, and you are very, you have agency, and you believe that you can make a difference, and that's why things are happening out west, and it's exciting. It's really exciting to watch. Okay, I am going to share my screen again and go back to the project that we were involved in. All right, so we used a software called Mural, and we created a classroom online. And our classroom online, these are just components from it. This is not what the board looked like. The actual board was a huge, messy classroom full of ideas, full of thoughts, things overlapping. You can't read some of the stickies. You've got literally sticky notes on top of sticky notes on top of sticky notes, dots all over the place, and it was this beautiful mess of ideas and thoughts and collaboration and groups working together. And the person that works with me pulled it all apart, pulled the stickies apart, and put them all in a nice little readable format for us so that we could use this. So these are some of the insights from the board. And know the rest of you who were in the group, you were not this neat, you were not this tidy, but that's okay. So we started out with something called an activity called look back to look forward. And for homework, this wasn't part of the homework. I asked people on a timeline of over 100 years to identify some of the moments where they think change happened in rural Western Canada, and to put them on as stickies on there. And it was absolutely covered in stickies all the way through. So there were lots and lots of moments of change. And then what we did was we came back, and as one of the first activities, I wanted to find out if we can kind of bring this back to some of the moments of change that you think from the past have influenced the present, and which ones have influenced the present the most. And so based on a voting activity that we did during that time, three pieces emerged. The first one was COVID. The most people in the group believe that COVID has influenced our present the most out of all of the moments of change that have happened. And the next one was climate change. And then next one in line, I think it was even a tie, was the Indian Act of 1876. And that is one of the pieces of information that you put on the board that you said and agreed was influencing the present day more than anything else that was on there. No technology changes, not AI, not anything like that. It was COVID, climate change, and the Indian Act of 1876, which was really, really interesting. I don't know that we would get those same kind of results from other places. But then it raised all of the issues about Indigenous futures and how linked they are to the future of rural Western communities. And it came up through the entire process that we were working through. Indigenous communities represent one of the fastest growing demographics in your area, and they have a significant cultural and economic impact on Western Canada. And the futures are linked, and any real fulsome discussion about the future is really requires having all of the stakeholders at the table, especially since it's been identified all the way through this project as something that is really critical to rural futures. So acknowledging that, with everybody in the group agreed that the current project is really a snapshot of rural community futures, but there is an acknowledgement that there's a really big influence here that needs to be explored more. So that was really interesting. That was right off the bat from the very, very beginning of the project. And then what we did was we broke them down into a timeline and to make a little bit more sense out of all of the stickies. and we put them in. I'm sure that you've had a chance to take a look at some of those while I was talking. And then that change timeline, we broke it down even more, and we started to look at which of these are new behaviors, which of them were new inventions that were created, which of them were events, a specific single event that impacted rural communities, and which were related to regulations and policy. And we got a really nice cross section of all of those in the group. So then we moved to drivers of change, and all of those moments of change in the past. We talked about them and why they were important, and how you can see them tracing through time to the present day, and what kind of an influence they've had, what kind of a direction they've sent rural communities in, and how far out they might still go, and what kind of an influence they might have down the road. And these are what we call drivers of change. So when we look today at drivers of change, a lot of them you can see started back 10, 20, 100, 200 years ago even. And those drivers of change, those big trend lines that we see, massive trend lines that are impacting not just your community, but parts of the world or the entire world. They are really, really fundamental to understanding what the future is going to look like. So we looked at drivers of change today, and we broke it down into social, environmental, technological, political, and economic. And we started exploring those. We've done a lot of group work with all of these pieces. So these are just the highlights. And then we started looking at finding data pieces to support the drivers of change, to illustrate what those drivers of change look like. So we were looking for graphs and charts and pieces of data that were fairly recent today that show some data, give us some data about those drivers of change. And we put those in with the links. And then what we did was we broke them apart and we looked at, are they positive or are they negative? Are they driving us in a positive direction? Or is that driver of change something that is taking us in a negative direction? And which ones fit in which category? Because no two drivers are the same. And we always had a sandbox where everybody could play and put comments and extra information and share other links and community data and that. So we had lots of extra data that came out as a result of these that weren't specific to the actual activity, but were really relevant to the work that we were doing. And then I know I'm going to go fast, Heather. Then we went into zones of innovation and disruption. I don't know how to do this in such a short period of time, because it was a massive project. Then we broke them into zones of innovation and disruption, and the categories that we have across the top were identified from our previous work. So this isn't something I created. This is what the group believed were some of those areas of major disruption and innovation. And we broke them down and divided them into innovation and disruption, and put them into each of those categories that we created from the drivers. So see how this is cumulative. Everything that we're doing is adding another layer to our understanding of our rural communities and the drivers that are pushing us forward or pulling us forward and moving us in a certain direction. Then this is the meat and potatoes. This is where actual scenarios and stories and the archetypes can be developed. These are called signals of change. And a signal of change is a surprising, eye-opening example of a small local change that disrupts the status quo. It points to how the future could be different from the present. It could be a new product, it could be a new practice, a new organization, an event, a new market strategy, even a new policy, a new technology. A lot of them are technology related. A recently revealed problem that we have. But the one thing the thing that differentiates them from drivers are massive trends that follow us through big swaths of time. Signals of change are really small. You might not notice them if you're not looking really hard. They're current, they're surprising, and they're specific. So we had to look for these signals of change, something that is small, surprising, and specific that's actually happening today. One of them that I shared was a Dutch supermarket that was, at the time I shared this, that introduced a slow checkout lane, and it's on this board. And a slow checkout, so what is it? A slow checkout lane was being offered to encourage interactions with staff and the people that were coming through to help combat loneliness in the grocery stores. And they were encouraging people to spend as much time as they wanted in the checkout line and chat. And that was a slow checkout lane was being marketed and tried in a number of urban grocery stores in the Netherlands. And so what does that mean? Why is that even important? Well, the so what, we talk about the what, this is what the signal is. The so what is that it's an example of an urban solution to a problem that they're having that we might already see in our own communities as natural, that something that happens that's not policy related, it's not a business practice, it's not something that's changed, but it's a change in the way people are behaving, and it's a change in the way people are feeling about their lives and the idea of loneliness in urban centers. And so it could be something that grows. It's a signal of change that may combine with some other signals of change and drivers and create a new storyline or catch on somewhere else, or, you know, be raised as an issue in smaller communities. When you're looking, well, you're talking about that rural urban divide, let's talk about some of those things that we have in common and the things that we're looking to do together. So then we looked at, oh, Heather, I'm going to have to cut this really short. Tell me, how much time do I have? And I'll see which pieces I'm going to cover.
Well, the other thing we can do too is if people have questions, we can just put it in the chat if you want something specific answered, just so I can get a sense.
Just jump in and stop me then when you get them in here.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so we pulled apart signals of change. We explored signals of change. We pulled all kinds of really interesting examples of signals of change up, and then we started categorizing them: political, legal, environmental, economic, technological, social. We started breaking them apart. And then what we did was we started playing with a scenario, with a title of the scenario. So we took the idea that a local growth, this was to practice with the tool to get everybody thinking about it. The idea was that the local grocery store becomes a hub for emergency response. So we explored that with something called a futures wheel. So these are not on a wheel, they were on our board on a wheel. And you start with the center, and the center was that the local grocery store becomes a hub for emergency response. Then directly around that, we put stickies that would be first order consequences. And we broke them down into these categories: political, legal, environmental, economic, technological, and social. And we started looking at what could be some of those consequences. And then from that layer, and once we did that, we started to pull out even further and look at, well, what's the consequence of the consequence, and how far out can we go? And you can do this for a very, very long time. And you're going to end up seeing brand new opportunities, brand new challenges that you wouldn't have considered. And you're going to have so much more that you could potentially, and I hate to use the word predict, but because we don't use it in futures thinking, but when you're using a futures wheel and you're doing all of the different layers of consequences, orders of consequences, you can prepare yourself for things that you may not have considered that could go wrong when you start pulling those threads apart. So it is about resilience as well. And then we did another really great activity, fun one that we should be doing a lot more of to investigate potential. We took 3 signals, completely unrelated signals from the boards. Everyone picked 3 in their groups, and they had to figure out a way, if these 3 signals of change happened at the same time in the same place, how could we, what kind of new possibility could result from it if we combine them? So, you know, down here we had a signal of change that was about modular housing, fast housing. Then they used another signal of change, co-housing, seniors and youth together. That was a signal of change that someone found. And then another signal of change that they found that had to do with small scale farming. If all 3 of those signals combined, what could be a new possibility? And they said communities building communities and not developers building communities. And that's with equity as a focus. And that was the beginning of a story arc that they could create from combining signals of change that they already identified. And it's fascinating what you can come up with when you start doing that. And that's how real life happens. That's how real futures happen. And that's how we get surprised by things that we hadn't considered, because they collide. These things do find their way together, and these signals of change combine and recombine to create new possibilities that we hadn't considered. But we can do some of that ourselves and see. And the other thing is, if it's something that you want, bring them together. If you want to build that new possibility, take those signals of change and introduce them to each other and figure out a way to create that future that you want. Then we moved in, this was halfway. This was only halfway. Then the other half of the time we spent in each week in one of those 4 archetypal scenarios, one of those futures. And we started exploring the future. And we took the futures topic for each one of those from the drivers that we worked on earlier in the project. So let me see. We started with, I think we started with, well, we explored, you know, which areas could drive, what could drive growth, where could there be potential divisions that could lead to collapse, where could there be possible transformations. And we started pulling all of that apart from the drivers, from the moments of change and all of that we were looking at earlier. And then we created a focus for each one of our scenarios. And our transformation focus was built around the idea that municipal governance was struggling, and we needed to have a transformation in municipal governance. And so that we looked at all of the signals of change in that we could pull out, and we looked at the drivers, and we looked at exploring the motives. So breakthrough insights that might change the status quo. Who could be the potential change makers that could bring about something new? What are the catalysts? What innovations could you possibly build on to create those breakthrough insights? And then what are the outcomes? What are those big stories that this idea might inspire? And we started pulling all of these apart, and we started exploring the community and what a transformation scenario might look like if we were looking at municipal governance. And we looked at identifying the top issues, we pulled them apart, and we looked at drivers of change that might influence that. And then we looked at signals of change that could drive that transformation if they combined, if they were, or they could, we have things like lotteries instead of elections. This is a link to an actual signal of change that's happening. Gamification of governance participation. These are tiny little innovations, things that are happening somewhere in the world that could give you an indication that change is possible. And if they collided and combined with other signals and drivers, What could that look like in your rural community? And so we did a lot of work in that area. And then we did the same thing with growth. And with growth, we looked at the demographic changes that are happening in our communities. And what if those demographic changes continued? What if populations continue to age? What if young people, now some communities are growing, young people are coming back and staying, but what if that trajectory where young people are leaving, that continues? What if we start seeing more immigration happening in our communities? And we did the same thing. We broke down the kinds of growth that could motivate stakeholders, likely winners and losers, obstacles that you may have to overcome, and what victory might look like. We did the same thing, looked at drivers of growth. We looked at the stakeholders, pulled all of those out. Then we looked at demographic patterns. What demographic patterns, what areas are growing. Then we looked at some of the signals of change, and we pulled up some very specific signals of change you're seeing in your communities and around the world that might influence it. We did the same thing with constraint, and our focus for the constraint scenario was around digital infrastructure and adoption. It's a big constraint. And what are all the ways that we could come together around that constraint to make it work in our community, and what values would drive that? What purpose would there be in the community to drive that change, whatever that change, that thing is that we're willing to do together as a community to combat that constraint. And we pulled it all apart again, the same way that we did before, slightly different questions, but we focused on all of those. And then we looked at, with this one, we looked at what are the dilemmas? What are the core dilemmas in each of those areas that we already identified with that digital adoption or that digital infrastructure piece? And what were the dilemmas? What are the things that we have to agree on? Because there's going to be one side and there's going to be another side. And what's this core value that could pull people together to work together to solve that problem? And it's a lot of really deep exploration of your community, but it's really worth it when you start pulling those things apart and trying to identify what is that could make two people who are not agreeing with each other, two positions that don't work together, what could make them come together in that community to make the situation tenable or work. Then we look at the signals of change again. And then with collapse, our collapse was around all of the polar opposites that are in our communities. So, we have people who are just not getting along. We have political polarization. We have some, demographic polarization. We have lots of we looked at all the different ways that we're polarized in our communities, and imagining that we cannot get past those things. And that drives us to a collapse. What does that look like? And we looked at the core tensions. We looked at the escalating factors. We looked at what would be the big risk, what's at stake, and who stands to lose the most if we cannot agree, if we cannot work together and cannot find that cooperation. And that took us to the very end. And that I'm going to end there, Heather, because we did a lot of work, and I'm sorry that it took so long to get through that. We didn't even get a chance to do a deep dive, but there'll be some of that in the report. So Heather will have another document for you that will kind of go into some of those insights, and you can see some of the work that was done. But what I want you to do is remember that there is no single future out there to be predicted, and there are many alternate futures that you can anticipate to some degree. And as we try to tackle the challenges of the next decade, we should not feel limited to what seems reasonable today, because you can't create, change, or invent something new unless you can imagine how things can be different. And the future is a place where anything can be different. And that's where I'm going to end, Heather.
That's a good spot to end, Mary. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you shared this. And I think what we're going to have to do is just leave it off here for today. Because I know people have to run here, which is all good. But I just want to mention the sort of like the outcomes of this project. And I'm glad Mary was able to show what we kind of give you a peek of what we did every week. But the sort of primary outcomes of this project were, number one, the group that was formed to bring insights together, I believe, was very energized in learning from each other and thinking together through these things. And I've also just seen people taking this on and becoming sort of an, you know, looking at opportunities and positive opportunities for their community. So bringing together that positive group was, I guess, one of my objectives for this project. And I hope that we can continue to convene this group in the future to continue to energize and have more people bring together sort of like for positive rural futures. The second sort of outcome of the project was actually creating the scenarios of themselves. So Mary actually took this information and wrote them into scenarios, which will be used in group facilitation. So I'm not actually going to release those publicly because they're kind of not something you can just plunk into the world and look at. They need to be something done in a group. So there will be opportunities for Mary to use them and possibly for others to use those scenarios that were created. The third outcome will actually just be that we sort of like added in at the end because we realized we need to be able to communicate some of this in a summary document for, you know, the rest of the world to see what we did, is what we're calling the insights report. So I'm going to send the insights report to everybody who's on this group, who signed up for this webinar, so you can take a look at, plus it's going to be posted on our website so you can see what some of the things that we found that were that mattered to this group, that were seen as opportunities, all kinds of different things. So some of the surprises and some of the you know, themes that emerged will come together in that insights report. So this has been a really interesting project to lead. We're just sort of like it was kind of one of those where you just sort of like, what's the saying, like you're building the bicycle while you're riding it, like, you know. But I think everybody really love the opportunity to think about this. And if you do want to think more about futures thinking, I would encourage you to take the Institute for the Future training. And once Mary gets her course up and running on rural futures, I just encourage everyone, because for me, there's no way I don't see for cooperatives to be developed or successful if people aren't thinking positively about their rural futures. You need to be seeing the potential. You need to be seeing what could be in order to go ahead and take the risk in creating something interesting. So that's kind of where it all comes together, and why this is this important work, because this is what, you know, these are where the future of businesses are going to be developed. And it bringing back like the cooperatives and ages and ages and age ago, when people actually, you know, were starting the, you know, seed co-ops and the fuel co-ops and all that kind of stuff, as they were responding to the challenges that they had, and with what they, you know, the resources they had at the time. So in order to kind of create the future, the next wave of cooperatives, I think we need people who are thinking this way in rural futures. So thanks for joining. I'm gonna cut it off there. I don't think we have anything in the chat for questions. So just thanks for joining, and I will send everybody an email with that insights report. And I think it's a week or two before we have everything formatted and ready to go. So thanks so much, and we'll hope to see you soon.